Are there any ways in which you think the war has changed you as a writer?
Well, I had two moments when I thought I lost sense of humor, but both time it came back in a new version, in a more gray or more black, more cynical version.
What were those moments, Andrey?
Well, I mean, the first time actually I lost sense of humor in 2014 in January when I was on Maidan and snipers were killing people, and I saw these people being killed and carried to McDonald's on the Maidan Square and laid there for hours until they were taken away. And the second time was on 24th of February, 2022, when all of Ukraine was shelled with missiles, and when we were woken up with my wife at 5 o'clock in the morning by 3 explosions outside.
And both times you found a way to recover your sense of humor, but perhaps in a slightly changed form.
Yeah. I mean, the first time, actually, I think it came back only some weeks afterwards. And in 2022, once we became displaced persons in Uzhhorod, in the town on the border with Slovakia, and we were met in such a nice way. Lots of people were helping us and helping each other, and we were given key by old lady from her apartment, and she moved in with her daughter's family, and it's like everybody was ready to do whatever we needed. I mean, this was the moment actually I relaxed. I felt at home. And what was incredible that this lady was retired lady originally from eastern Ukraine, but many years ago moved to Carpathian region, and she had in the small library in this flat the same books that had my parents in their house, in their apartment. So I mean, even this small detail made me feel at home.
Presumably, that sense of that blackly comic sense of humor that you have in your writing is something that perhaps you see reflected more broadly in Ukrainian society now?
Well, I mean, there is a tradition of humor in Ukraine, whereas in Russia there is a tradition of satire.
Right.
And in this sense, yeah, Ukrainians love jokes. And actually, in the first 6 months, when the whole nation was shocked, the humor was coming from the soldiers. The soldiers were trying to motivate the civil population. They were recording funny videos on the front lines and sending them and posting them on Facebook, sending them online. And so actually they were like like doctors treating the society. So they were healthier psychologically than the people at the rear.
How has it been for you coming back to, so a book such as The Stolen Heart, you would have written before the invasion, and presumably now that it's being published in English, you're returning to it, you're doing interviews around it, publicity. How has it been returning to that text now? Do you see a difference in the way you were writing or thinking before the invasion?
Well, I mean, this series of books about 1919, they are about the similar situation in Ukraine when Red Army was trying to destroy the Ukrainian armies which were fighting for independence. And there were two armies. I mean, one was of Hetman Skoropadsky, who was the first leader of independent Ukraine in 1918 when German army helped Ukraine to get independence from Russian Empire. And then the army of Simon Petlura, who wanted to build different independent Ukraine. I think I can write now only about this period. I cannot write fiction about what is happening today because I am writing non-fiction about it. I'm writing what is happening. And I don't feel like it is appropriate to use imagination and to invent stories because there are so many real stories, tragic and dramatic, that need to be told. But the similar stories, the similar dramatic and tragic years from the past, I mean, they are easier to work with. And actually, the difference I noticed that when I was finishing finally the third book, I had in some episodes level of violence that I wouldn't allow myself before the full-scale invasion. So for me, the violence became acceptable in the literature. And I'm not very happy about it.
Why would you have held back from that level of descriptive writing about violence before?
Probably because I thought that violence of the kind of like Kyiv in 1918, 1919 belonged to the past. After Bucha, after Borodyanka, after Okhtirka, after massacres committed by Russian soldiers, I understood that actually the level of violence is the same. There are always people actually who are prepared to rape, to kill, to burn the bodies of just killed family. When you realize that it is possible now, so this is part of the truth of today's life. It is horrible, yes, but I mean, I've been to Bucha, I've been to Borodyanka. There are things I saw and I wouldn't like to really to see again.
What is life like in Kyiv for you now?
Well, it's not a normal life anymore already for 3 years. People adapted to this kind of life with permanent danger. Kyiv is different because we have 500,000 of displaced persons from other regions who live now in Kyiv, and 500,000 of Kyivites went as refugees either abroad or to the western regions of Ukraine. In Kyiv, as well as in other big cities, people don't sleep because every night we have several air raid alerts. And then every time you have to go into internet and check for the reasons of the alerts. Usually it is drones. So if it is drones, then you listen to the either anti-air system fire outside the window or explosions, and then you hide in the corridor. Sometimes you go into the stairwell of the house, and if it is missiles, ballistics or cruise missiles, you go to the shelter or you run to the metro stations if you live not far away from them. In the morning, everybody goes to work. Most people are walking and yawning because they didn't sleep, but then they sort of get some additional energy. They drink much more coffee than before, and the coffee shops are open from 7 o'clock in the morning. Some are open from 6. So you have queues of people who want to grab coffee and to run further towards their offices.
I presume your consumption of news in the last couple of years has been very different, very heightened to how it was before, and you're also checking kind of military information and so on.
Well, I changed already several applications because there is a choice of applications that can tell you whether you are in danger of shelling or not. So you can actually program the place, your location where you live or your region. And I have now actually Kyiv as my region. So every time there is a siren in Kyiv, I have this siren also on my phone. And of course, because lately the drones are flying very low, they cannot be seen by the radar systems. So that's why another app was introduced so that people who hear the drone overhead, they would press a button on this app, and the information of this person's location together with the location of the or route of the drone will go to some electronic center where they will understand which way the drone is flying. And to better understand you, I mean, you should see the quantity of the drones. Like 3 nights ago, we had 177 drones attacking Ukraine. Half of them were attacking Kyiv and Kyiv region. So there are always drones that hit the targets, and there are drones which are intercepted and then sometimes fall on the houses, destroying houses and destroying cars. The drones which are intercepted over Kyiv, I mean, they hit the high rises, they hit the cars, sometimes they hit the roads. So it's dangerous whether you stop them flying or if they continue and they will hit the electrical station or some kind of civil infrastructure.
You describe this highly caffeinated workforce going about its business every day. There's a meme that describes that circulates particularly among young Ukrainians of work-war balance. I wonder how you think the war has changed Ukraine's youth.
Well, youth is in a way trying to enjoy time even in this period of war, because we have a bar in the cellar of our house where we live, and there are crowds of young people, and then the bar is closed about 10 o'clock in the evening, but the curfew begins at 12, so they all congregate after bar in the small square next to our house, and you can see sometimes 50, 70 young people talking and listening to music and sharing the information. The young people are trying to travel inside Ukraine much more now when they have a moment than before. Because you can travel by train, by bus, of course, by Uber, hitchhiking, whatever. And also our children started traveling more often to neighboring cities and towns just to learn more about the country. It's just like the soldiers in the beginning of the war, they asked their friends to send them nonfiction books on history of Ukraine. And for months, actually, people were sending to the front lines several popular titles from Ukrainian historians. And it was clear that actually that the soldiers wanted to know more about the country they are defending, about their own country. So the history became much more relevant in the time of the war than it was before.
That sense of youth and a nightlife persisting in your time in Kyiv, is that been a constant, or has it ebbed and flowed depending on the situation?
No, we didn't have it in the first 6 months of the war. Actually, it sort of restarted slowly. It restarted with an online sale of beer. But this first online sales of beer in Kyiv, they were without delivery.
Right.
So suddenly, actually, everybody knew where you can order beer, but then you have to go there
and pick it up.
and to pick it up. And it was slightly surreal because there is a small shop which was working all the time, and of course, in the beginning of the war, there was a dry law. There was no alcohol on sale. But once actually this beer was on sale, it was also on sale in a shop. But online purchase is more romantic and more cool.
Between the drones and the missiles and that aspect of the war, and your position with a bar in your cellar and a courtyard outside with young people congregating till midnight, do you have a desperate need for peace and quiet, or do you actually thrive in that urban, noisy, busy human environment?
I'm used to both ways. So it's not a problem. In a way, it's even more interesting when you have under your windows 50 young people talking and laughing and shouting and sharing jokes. And actually, when there is a siren, they don't go away.
Okay.
Usually, they all check the smartphones, and they stay.
You have a really interesting section in your diary in this week's New Statesman where you talk about 4 different Ukraines. I wonder if you could just describe that to us, how you see the population as being divided up into different sections.
Well, I want first probably to mention that actually Ukraine consists of 26 regions. And some regions are very different from others, and people are there different linguistically, psychologically, mentally. But now, actually, because the war did have an impact on the whole society, so now we don't talk about difference between Donbas and Transcarpathian region. We are talking about the congregations of people who suddenly were united by their destiny. So, we have one Ukraine of refugees abroad, about 7 million people, who have similar views, similar attitudes. So if you ask them the same question, probably many of them will give you the same answer. 4 or 5 million displaced persons who live mostly in the west and central Ukraine, and before they lived in the south and in the east. You have 1 million in the Ukrainian army, mostly on the front line or near front line. And of course, half of Ukraine still lives at home like me. I mean, I live in the same apartment where I lived before the war. I was actually a displaced person for 4 months. I was a refugee in France for 2 months. Then I came back, and then and I travel and I come back. And so, but I live at home. The only difference is that I don't feel actually that this apartment belongs to me anymore. It belongs to the
Mm.
war. We have regular missile explosions 1 kilometer from our home, 800 meters, because I'm in a very nice area. It's historical center between the church built in 12th century and the headquarters of Ukrainian Secret Service.
When you say you feel your home now belongs to the war, what do you mean? You mean you're less attached, you're willing to give it up, or just that geographically, because you're in the center of the war?
No, I accept it that I can lose everything.
Right. Yeah.
And actually, I have this feeling from the first day of the full-scale invasion.
Mm.
I mean, when we left our apartment, I didn't take anything at all. So we went first to our countryside house, and then we went to Lviv, and then to Transcarpathian region. But my wife Elizabeth, she took some things. But I mean, like I don't know why, but I mean, first I was paralyzed for 40 minutes after the first explosions at 5 a.m.
Mm.
And then when next morning we left, I just didn't think that I need to take anything.
Mm.
I left everything behind me. But generally, I mean, our friends had all the windows and doors blown away by the explosion, and they live just 10 minutes walk from us. And we went to the apartment, and I saw what happens actually when a missile explodes 100 meters from your house. So practically hundreds of flats are destroyed.
Mm.
The roof was blown away. So I mean, I can easily imagine the same happening next to our house. That's why I say that I lost the feeling of value of material things, and maybe it is some kind of protection, psychological protection, not to mourn, not to cry when you see actually your world destroyed.
Those four groups that you mentioned, their experiences of the war are quite different. Do you think about after the war whether there might be divisions within Ukraine created by the fact that people have had such radically different experiences of the conflict?
Well, there might be divisions, but they will not be radical. I mean, there are divisions now between those who left the country and those who stayed. But I mean, there is not much anger. And I mean, Ukraine is a society of individualists. So everyone understands that the other person has completely different idea and opinion. And yes, you can argue, but in the end, actually, each one will keep his own idea and will not be persuaded to change it. But what will happen definitely, many people who are now refugees abroad will not come back. And that this new diaspora, new migration, it will be very different. Because in order to justify not coming back for themselves, they will be pessimistic about future of Ukraine. They will tell each other that there is no future, then we don't have a choice. In fact, the choice will be always there. But I mean, this is how it works. People actually who were emigrating from the Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they were saying to themselves and to their friends that there is no future here. You see, the country is in ruins. And the country rebuilt itself. And actually, it was a wonderful country before the Euromaidan, before the annexation of Crimea, before the beginning of this war, which is now 11 years old.
That sense of pessimism is important, isn't it? And in your diary, you mention a friend saying to you, "I understand that Ukrainians are now all depressed," and you understand where they're coming from, but your reaction is not necessarily to agree with that. You're not. It's the state is not one of depression necessarily.
No. I mean, there are more pessimists now, definitely, than before, since Trump became the US president. But there is also more anger. I mean, like, you don't see depressed, sad people on the street or among your friends. I mean, there are people who are more cynical than before, but mostly, actually, people are more angry. They are, I mean, they are angry not only with Putin and Russia. They are quite often angry with Ukrainian leadership, with different politicians, with Ukrainian parliamentaries, and with each other also. And it is not like the anger which is destroying the life of society. In a way, it's adrenaline.
Yes.
It just shows that the person has an active attitude, active position.
One thing you capture very well often in your writing is the sense of surrealism in social and political life in Ukraine. And in your piece this week, you have this wonderful idea of creating a sort of Richter scale of surrealism, which you decide you're going to measure in Kafka's and Orwell's. Can you explain that to us and where you think Ukraine currently sits on that scale?
I mean, like when Trump said that Zelensky is a dictator and Putin is a nice guy, this is I think it's a surrealism of the level that can be measured in 4, 5, 6 Orwells.
So the Orwell is the more extreme.
Orwell is the bigger. Yeah. I mean, Kafka's are units which are, I mean, sometimes funny.
Yeah.
Sometimes funny and surreal. When people are, like in Russia, arrested because they went out with the poster "No to the War," this is already 7, 8 Orwells. Or people who want peace. Or I mean, a priest in Russia was dismissed from the church because he wanted to pray for peace, not for the war. Here, without Orwell's, you cannot judge the situation. For Russia, Orwell's system is very natural now. And Trump wants to find common language with Putin. So he's either learning this Orwellian language or he's naturally talented. He picks up very quickly what is happening in Russia and starts speaking their language.
Your own publishing career continues. You've recently published a new novel in the UK, The Stolen Heart. It's the second in a series of mystery novels set in revolutionary Kyiv. This was first published in 2021 in Russian. Why is it being translated now? Is that a longer than usual gap in terms of moving from Russian to English? How's it working, Andrey?
Well, I think actually I wouldn't say there was a delay because I mean the translation takes time.
Yes.
And I have a brilliant translator, Boris Draluk, who lives in the States, who was born in Odessa, who knows Ukraine very well, and who knows actually the history of Russian Empire very well. And he was working hard, but it takes time. Actually, I managed last November to finish the third part.
Wow.
So the third part will come maybe a bit faster to English language readers. But not in my case. It usually takes much longer to get something translated into English. And for example, my novel, The Bigfoot's Fuse, that I finished in 1989, was published in English only in 2010. So that was a book with a delay.
So Russian is your first language, and it's the language that you write your novels in. How has your own relationship with the Russian language changed since the start of the war, if it has?
Well, it's my mother tongue. It's the language of my parents. And I still use it, as you can see, writing fiction. Non-fiction I write in Ukrainian also and in English. And books for kids I write in Ukrainian. The books in Russian are not welcome now in the bookshops. You can buy them online in the online bookshops, but the physical bookshops don't want to sell books in Russian. Also, sometimes not to provoke aggressive reaction. So my latest books are not published in Russian. They are published at once in Ukrainian translation. And this is the destiny of other Russian language poets and writers in Ukraine. We will have after the war, I think, 2 or 3 times less Russian speakers, and actually it will become slowly really minority language, not one of 2 main languages in Ukraine, partially because most Russian speakers lived in Donbass and were killed in Donbass, in Bakhmut and Mariupol by the Russian army. Many of refugees from Ukraine abroad are also inhabitants of the south and Russian-speaking east. Yeah, I mean, the language lost its importance for Ukrainians. It doesn't mean that you cannot speak it in the street. I mean, lots of people are speaking Russian in the street, and there are cities where you hear more Russian than Ukrainian. But Ukrainian is more fashionable, especially among young people. And Ukrainian is a marker of your patriotism. You can be a Russian-speaking Ukrainian patriot, but lots of Ukrainian-speaking activists are questioning this, and they always say that if you are a patriot, you should speak Ukrainian.
I remember you writing, I think, in a piece for the New Statesman a couple of years ago, reflecting on how Ukrainians' relationship with the language was changing, and you mentioned that in the late 90s your novels were actually more successful in Russia than they were in Ukraine, and you were even receiving requests from Russian publishers to set your books in Russia. What did you make of that at the time? How did you feel about that idea of your work moving more towards Russia?
Well, I refused straight away because I mean I thought it is a surreal idea, but typically Russian idea. My books are already for many years are not sold and published in Russia. So whoever read me already forgot me many years ago. So I don't exist there as a writer.
Right.
And in Ukraine, I'm not very popular because I write in Russian and because sometimes I write or say things not everybody agrees with. So I'm a controversial figure, and it's better not to mention me when somebody writes an article about Ukrainian literature.
That's interesting what you're saying about your reception within Ukraine, but have you seen a rise in interest internationally in your work since the start of the war, and perhaps a rising interest in wider Ukrainian culture?
Yeah, both. Actually, there were much more books translated from Ukrainian from 2022. And there was a huge rise in the number of the sales in Europe of the better known writers from Ukraine like me. And of course, there were more requests from media for the writers to write diaries and essays and articles. So also people who don't read books, they were reading essays by Ukrainian writers, and then probably some of them were interested what these writers are also writing. And now there is less interest because 3 years it's a long time. And in these 3 years, Ukrainian writers acquired new audience in the West, but now it's already not so in demand. The books about Ukraine, from Ukraine.